Afternoon, John. How are you?
I'm very well, Will. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. Good. So I know we had a session to talk about impositioning, where we talked about bound products. So I thought today would be a good opportunity to talk about unbound products, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely, no problem whatsoever. So it's interesting. I mean, the actual impositions that you get from unbound products are, in theory, in principle, much easier to do. But actually, because there are so many more variables involved, that it ends up with a bigger project than the unbound. You have to work out everything 1 up, everything 2 up, everything 4 up, everything 6 up, everything 8 up, and then on all the different devices and the different orientations. And before you know it, you can end up with a lot of profiles. So in most cases with the layout library, we tend not to set up profiles for all unbound components. We just don't do it. And the reason that we don't do it is that is because the task is too onerous. And actually what Tharstern comes up with off the bat is often good enough. I mean, we've been doing this for a long time since we created Estimate Pro. So we know about the bleed and the trim values, and we know about leaving space for color bars, and we know about printable and non-printable areas. So all of those things are already in there. So when you're telling it that something just needs to be 4 up, it's a much easier imposition to do than a bound product where you've got to consider overfold and creep and margins and so on and so forth. So normally, in most cases, you just use a standard Tharstern imposition. You wouldn't need to do anything else. That's all you'd need to do. However, the layout library still has got a place in the game. We tend to use it when Tharstern estimating doesn't come up with a solution that you require. So it could be, for argument's sake, let's say a Dutch cut product or a Stonehenge product, where basically you've got 3 elements going across the bottom that are portrait, and then it rotates the 2 at the top. So with the layout library, you would have the ability to sort of position those on the outer trims. Whereas if you didn't have the imposition in there, that you would have the 3 columns going across horizontally at the bottom. The first one would start in the top left, and the next one would run exactly parallel to it or alongside it. So you'd end up with a big gap on the right hand side. And in most cases, that's not the way a guillotine operator would want to trim that job down. So it's not the sort of thing that they want to do. So if you create a layout profile for that every time that scenario is met, every time you've got a job that warrants a Stonehenge solution, the layout library can kick in and say, yeah, I know how to do this, and override the way that works. There is another way that you use it as well, and this is interesting. This is sort of a little further down the path from the original implementation. You may very well produce a job that has got a finishing process being applied to it, and that finishing process, might be laminating or encapsulating that you need to send it out. But when you produce the initial laydown, you won't consider that finishing process, or you may not consider that finishing process. What's the best way to run it down, to lay it down, to make it optimally run through that particular piece of finishing equipment. In some cases, you might compromise the speed of that job, or in worst case scenario, you might not be able to manufacture it at all. So the layout library gives you the ability that when you have an issue like that, when there's a problem occurs, is that you can have the meeting to discuss, what went wrong and so on and so forth. And instead of saying, oh, we're going to put an additional check in place to make sure we don't make that mistake again, or go and shout at the estimator, or do whatever you need to do, what you can do is you can make a layout profile that is only triggered and only activated when that particular finishing process is selected and activated. So it forces the estimator to lay it down in a way that it can be optimally finished.
So how does that work with the version products?
Okay, so versioning, interesting. So you just create a standard sheet profile for it, but when you build the profile, if you run the versions up the sheet as opposed to across the sheet, it basically follows the tracking. So if I have multiple versions that are printed on the same sheet, they'll run up the sheet vertically instead of horizontally. So that's often not the way that printers would ever produce a job, because they obviously want colors, same light colors going up along the press to make it much easier. So you can actually create those profiles, and yeah, it works really well with versions, and actually sort of forces the laydowns. If you want to do a business card 21 up, And every time you hit calculate in Tharstern, it comes up and says, yeah, you could have it 16 up, 12 up, 21 up, 24 up, 36 up, whatever it is. You could hard code it in there that every time you hit business card and go for it, it comes up with a standard laydown, which means, again, you know, something like a business card cutter. You know, you see these business card cutters that you've got out there, you can have laydowns specifically for them where the cards aren't centered. They're sort of off to the edge. And of course, if you get that with the version information in there as well, it's all good.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, John. Thank you for your time. And thank you for everyone who's watched this. If you've got any questions, queries, just give us a call on the usual numbers. Have a good day.
Thank you.